1 out of 5 in America are going through some kind of a mental issue. Do you see that it's a big crisis in America?
We have seen that increase in mental health problems across the board, and especially in the recent years, we've seen it in our youth. And that to me is the most concerning. How could we do mental health differently? And so this is where I really started to develop a very, very keen interest in holistic mental health, rather than just treating symptoms, trying to understand the root issues that are causing mental health problems and how we can address those. If you don't address the underlying cause, then the disease process continues, and then pretty soon the symptoms come back, but now people are stuck on a medication. When we help people to understand, well, maybe some dietary factors or maybe this or that is contributing, they're saying, no, there's things I can do to improve my life. And as I do that, I can become a healthier, more well-rounded person. I can start to discover, who I was really meant to be. And that's really fulfilling.
What is the appropriate age for a child to even have a smartphone?
Under age 5, kids shouldn't have screen time.
Dr. Binus, a few months ago, you came to the Rotary meeting, and what you said at the meeting really resonated with me. And I just feel like your work and what you talked about is so important and so necessary. And I think that doesn't get enough of attention. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what you do, what Beautiful Minds is. So for those people who don't know you, who never heard about Beautiful Minds, can you please give us a little background of who you are and what Beautiful Minds is?
Sure. So basically, I'm a psychiatrist, and when I went to medical school, I had every intention of becoming a surgeon, going to Africa, being a missionary surgeon, so to speak. But, in the process of medical school, it was interesting because I went through some of my own challenges, and I think we all have our journey, right? And for me, I had some various struggles, nothing that I think was severe, definitely didn't land me in the mental hospital, thank God. But, in my 4th year of medical school, after I had already interviewed for surgery, I had kind of one of these transformative moments where I was thinking about my future. I was thinking about, going into surgery and what that would be like. And I was thinking about whether that was really what I wanted to do and my calling. And up to this point, I knew this is my calling. I'm going into surgery. But as in this, and it was actually a hike up a mountain on a Saturday morning. And as I was thinking about my future, I really had a paradigm shift where I realized, this is not what I want to do for the future anymore. And I said, you know what, better to change my mind now rather than 10 years down the road. So I let that whole surgery thing go. And then I was like, okay, well, now I've gone through almost 4 years of medical school. I have a huge amount of debt to pay. What do I do with the rest of my life, right? I can't just give up on medicine. I guess I could, but it wouldn't be a very wise decision. So I was thinking about, my own transformative process and the journey that I had been, the healing journey, the journey of growth. And I said, I really want to help other people experience this as well. And I said, well, in medicine, what's the closest thing that I could do to helping people, to really help them foster their own journey? And it hit me just like that. It was like psychiatry. And I felt this real calling to go into psychiatry, and I felt a real peace. And so after that, I came down the mountain and I called my family, and they were actually pretty excited, even though I thought they might think, oh, is he going crazy or something? Maybe he needs a psychiatrist, right? But I called them, and they were like, no, we could really see you, going that direction. And so then the next week I called the Department of Psychiatry, and I called the department, and I said, I really want to change my direction. I want to go into psychiatry. Could I interview for a residency position? And the person on the other line, the secretary, she said, well, unfortunately, we've finished all the interviews for the season, And I said, "Oh, could you please talk to the program director to see if they can make an exception?" And she paused for a moment, and then she said, "Yeah, I'll check." And so they called me back, and uh, they said, "Well, we'll go ahead and offer you, an interview at least." And I think they were wanting to see if I was mentally stable because of the quick change, right? So
Mm.
long story short, it worked out. It was meant to be. I believe God really opened the right doors for me to go into psychiatry, even though that was the only program that I interviewed with. And then after that, and this was down at Loma Linda in Southern California. After that, I entered into the psychiatric residency training program. And there's so many things I could say there, but it was a great training program. But one thing I recognized very quickly on the field of psychiatry as a whole, and this is not a knock on Loma Linda because they did a great job of training me, but the field as a whole, I was disappointed because what I saw was a very big focus on medication. And
Mm.
so this is where in my own mind I started to get, kind of disappointed, like, what am I doing in this field and we're trying to shoot for transformation here. I'm really trying to help people in that growth in their lives where they can not just feel better, but really become whole people, become who God meant them to be. And so through that process, I said, how could we do mental health differently? And so this is where I really started to develop a very, very keen interest in holistic mental health rather than just treating symptoms, trying to understand the root issues that are causing mental health problems and how we can address those. And that's what eventually led to the birth of our clinic, Beautiful Minds, in Auburn, California. And we have a lot of fun working with people. And why is it fun? Because you're like, whoa, you're working with depression, anxiety, all these things. The reason it's fun is because we get to see lives changed every day. We get to see people get their lives back, and that's beautiful.
That's amazing. I did watch some of the videos, your earlier videos on YouTube, where I guess some of the people who you guys worked with, their their experience, their transformation, it's just so amazing. Um, but how are you guys different? I know you said holistic approach. For those people who are not really well versed in psychiatry or the way either depression or some mental illnesses how they get treated, how is that different from a typical clinic that what you talked about, what you noticed about the university where it was um, very heavily focused on medicine,
Hmm.
prescribing medicine instead of what your guys' approach, what you do right now. What is that difference?
Yeah. So when you look at the approach to mental health treatment in general, there's two main approaches that are used. The number one treatment for mental illness is medication. So, basically, as psychiatrists, we are trained to diagnose and treat. So you figure out, okay, which diagnostic criteria does this person meet? And then you make a diagnosis based on what symptoms they have. And then based on what symptoms they have, you then try to find the best medication to treat those symptoms. And of course, the second most common treatment is counseling, psychotherapy, which is also very helpful. But the problem with the approach, especially with the medication, is that for the most part, again, the focus is more on the symptoms rather than really truly understanding what caused this in the first place. And I'm not, I'm not trying to say that all of psychiatry is only focused on symptoms, but the majority is more, let's help you feel better. The approach that I found to be more helpful, because this feel better approach, it works to some degree, right? In other words, it might help people feel significantly better for several months or even several years. But the problem is, if you don't address the underlying cause, then the disease process continues, and then pretty soon the symptoms come back. But now people are stuck on a medication, and they are doing just as badly as they did at first. And so then that's when it's like, okay, well, we just need another medication, right?
Mhm.
And so it ends up just symptom management rather than helping people to really understand why is this happening in the first place and addressing that underlying issue. And when people address that underlying issue, then they actually get better and stay better. And not only that, their lives continue to improve and they become even higher functioning than they ever were before. And so that's what makes, our approach to mental health unique and really rewarding, because when we help people to understand, well, maybe some dietary factors or maybe this or that is contributing, and they start addressing those, now they start to have a sense of empowerment rather than kind of this passive state of like, oh, fix me. They're saying, no, there's things I can do to improve my life. And as I do that, I can become a healthier, more well-rounded person. I can start to discover, who I was really meant to be, plugging in with that sense of destiny, purpose in their
Mhm.
life. And that's really fulfilling.
Yeah, I think it's much easier to treat the symptoms
Yes.
than really get to the cause. So I think that's great. Can you talk a little bit about the words "choose life" on
Hmm.
your website?
Yes.
I really like that because obviously those two words also have a meaning, especially for those people who are probably deep in certain like depression where they're potentially suicidal. So choose life.
Hmm.
But the the meaning of choose life on on your website. Can you briefly talk about that?
Of course, yes. So this is an acronym that we, some of our staff, I didn't personally come up with it, so I can't take the credit, but some of our amazing staff came up with. And it's a very nice acronym because it helps us, thinking about the root causes for mental health problems. It helps us keep in mind what some of those, well, basically all the important ones are. And so each one of those letters, it's an acronym, it stands for an important mental health, and even you could say holistic health principle. So the first one is connection. And so that's what the C stands for. And connection has been shown in the research over and over again to be tremendously important, not just for mental health, but even for physical health as well. It's actually, when people are lonely, that is worse for your health than obesity or even smoking 15 cigarettes a day, believe it or not. And
Wow.
yeah, it's an amazing topic, actually. I mean, I have whole lectures just on the C, the connection. And I think about one of the famous internal medicine physicians who was one of the first to help to prove that heart disease could be reversed. He wrote a book on this topic because as he was coming up with this holistic program for treating and reversing heart disease, he was looking at the different factors that affected heart disease. And he went on to say, I don't know any other factor in medicine, not stress, not exercise, not nutrition. And he listed several other things, genetics, et cetera, that has a greater impact on longevity and quality of life and overall health than does connection. And so
Wow.
it's just, and this guy is not even in mental health, right? So
Mm.
connection is foundational, and
Okay.
we really encourage people. So that's just the C.
Okay. All right. So
You want to hear some
then
of the other ones?
let's go over a
Okay.
few of the
Yeah.
other
So
ones.
I can just go through it really quick. Don't worry. I don't need to take as much time on everyone. We're not going to do a mini lecture on everyone, right? Maybe we'll do that sometime at a future date. But
Sure.
the H is hydration. So very important, obviously, thinking about water, not just water, but making sure that you're well hydrated. And even the external use of water can be very beneficial. And we talk to our patients about that. The O is optimism. So having a positive attitude, looking for things that we can be thankful for, and things, the silver lining, even when things go bad in life. This is one of the things that many of our patients find the most helpful, because what they realize is, there's so much we can't control in life, right? And then that starts getting them down. It's like, oh, no matter how hard I try, I can't change this or control this. But what we teach people is, yes, you can't control a lot of what happens in life, but what can you control? How you respond to that. And that makes all the difference in the world. The second O is oxygen. So the importance of breathing fresh air. And also, very interesting, I've done a lot of studying into this one too. It's not just breathing fresh air, it's not just what we breathe, but it's also how we breathe. And
Mm.
so, for example, very simply, When you're exercising, it's much better to breathe through your nose. And even in general, they've found that doing nasal breathing versus mouth breathing is much better for your overall health. So simple things like that. The S stands for self-control. And so we talk about temperance. We talk about abstaining from things that are harmful from our body for our bodies, and even those things that are okay and healthy, we want to do in moderation. For example, exercise is great, right? But if you over-exercise, then you can hurt yourself.
Yeah.
And then the E stands for exercise. So that obviously is important for mental, physical health in every dimension. And then the L stands for light. So the importance of having a bright light every day, spending some time out in the sun. And it really kind of goes along with the next one, which is I, internal clock, which has to do with our circadian rhythm. Our bodies function best when we have a rhythm that we live by day in, day out, when it knows when to expect that we're going to go to sleep, when we're going to eat breakfast, that sort of thing. And it's not just important to have a certain routine, but we also find from the research that it's best to actually, like Ben Franklin, I believe it was, who said, early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? And
Hmm.
so it's important to actually get that sleep before midnight, ideally at least an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then get up early. Our body's going to function much better
Is
on the.
that for everyone like that, or do you guys like determine on who the person is and what their circadian rhythm is?
It's a great question. And I know there's some research that does show, like, okay, some people are more predisposed to being quote unquote night owls, but we really encourage people, even if you have more of a tendency to work late and to function well at night, to still try to get at least an hour and a half or so before midnight, because your quality of sleep is actually different, and it's much more difficult to get into a deep restorative, what we call stage 4 or 3, now they call it non-REM stage 3 sleep. uh, and that is where we actually get the most restorative sleep. It's also the time of night where we get the what we call deep brain cleaning, where our brains are actually cleansed with this fluid that goes into there. But if we don't get that really deep sleep, we don't get that brain cleansing.
Mm.
And then the F stands for food. And so we really advocate for very clean diet. The number one most important factor is trying to avoid processed foods. And we have so much of that in our society today. So sugar, but anything that's in a package, really trying to eat more whole foods. And then the second aspect is plant-based. So we never tell people you have to be a vegetarian, but the research actually does support the idea of trying to minimize meat and dairy as much as possible. And there's a lot we could say there too. But then the final E is for environment. So the importance of our external environment. Just like you have a beautiful studio here, this helps our mental health. Things are in order. If we have chaos and rubbish in our environment, or if we're even surrounded by toxic people, that's going to affect us
Oh
in a
yeah.
huge way as well.
All right. This big question that I've been thinking about lately is um, the overall country, our country, and the overall state of the country's mental health. Do you feel like America has a problem with that? Because I'm looking at various studies that are coming out. Just recently, there's a study that was done by the American Psychological Association, and its title reads, Mental Health Care is in High Demand. Psychologists are leveraging tech and peers to meet the need. But here, as I was reading this, um, it says that when asked about the specific barriers of accessing care, 80% cited cost and more than 60% cited shame and stigma as the main obstacles. Um, and then some other studies were showing that 1 out of 5 in America, 1 out of 5 adults or just people in general, I don't remember exactly, are going through some kind of a mental issue. Is that, do you see that it's a big crisis in America?
It is. It's a huge crisis, and like you said, it's more than 1 in 5 people, on average per in a given year. That's not a lifetime. That's just excuse me, in 1 year. Excuse me. That are struggling with a mental health illness, and so this is and part of the issue that I've looked at over the years is that mental health problems have steadily increased since World War II, and so we've seen a slow uptick, but then in recent years it seems to be accelerating, especially with the pandemic and whatnot. But we have seen that increase in mental health problems across the board. And especially in the recent years, we've seen it in our youth. And that to me is the most concerning because I think about the future of our country, the future of our communities, the future of our families. I think about our children. I have 3 young children, and I'm like, wow, this is not looking good for the future.
Yeah, I'm also noticing this issue and the social media, internet. I mean, when we look at where we are right now compared to, let's say, even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we have more stuff. We have more access to information. We can really learn some great things online, educate ourselves pretty much for free on YouTube and other various platforms. We can stay connected with someone who's in a different country. But at the same time, it's not helping. And like there's another study that I just recently read, the article in The Guardian. It says here that young people are becoming less happy than older generations, research shows. Um, do you think that a lot of it has to do with the food, social media, the maybe father figure missing? Um, like, what do you think? Like, maybe like the top main causes for this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we need to look at history. And again, like I said, if we start looking shortly after World War II, which is where we really saw that decline in mental health problems, well, what happened after that? Well, there were several factors that came into play. And then, of course, in recent years, we've seen the acceleration of some of those factors. But some of the main factors, I believe, were between 1947 and 1950, you saw a huge amount of televisions being sold. Very interesting. And it just blew up. And so essentially, of course, before then we had radio, et cetera, but we had a new member of the family enter the home. And this member
The
of the
nanny,
family,
the new nanny.
yeah, the new nanny, exactly. The television had a tremendous influence. This is the first time that we really had mass media in a way, And so what happened at that point is that people started to be exposed to not only the TV programs, but also the commercials and the things that went along with TV advertising. Again, on a much grander scale. And what then happened is that the mentality of Americans started to actually change. And we started to enter into what some historians call consumerism. And so essentially, people started to have this mentality that, you know what, unless I have the latest and greatest, I can't really be happy. And so because of that, there was a trend in society to start buying more and more. And the historical data actually showed there was a huge uptick, in purchasing all sorts of things. I mean, this is where a lot of these kitchen gadgets and, a lot of things that have made our lives simpler came in. But what happened along with that, because people were buying so much and they were also, needed 2 cars and all these things that they felt they needed, the amount of money people were spending rose dramatically. And then as a result of the amount of money that they were needing for their new lifestyle, indebtedness went up. And then so how did they keep up with that? Well, In a lot of homes, this is where mothers then went to work. Now, I'm not against, don't get me wrong, to our listeners, don't come and try to find me and crucify me, but because I'm not against women working, right? My wife works and this sort of thing. But the point being, the traditional family structure started to break down. And so you had less interaction in the family units. You had less of that connection that we talked about earlier, how important that is. And you might have spent, a good amount of time with your family, but a lot of it ended up even being in front of the TV at that point. And so I think the breakdown of the traditional American family structure and the shift in values started to take place around that time. And it's very interesting because some studies have shown, how previous to World War II, you had more of what we call intrinsic value system. So what does that mean? Well, that means you have more concern about the importance of your values as far as like how you can do good for the greater good, the community. How what's going to really be for the benefit of other people and for my relationships, right? And the shift went more to extrinsic values, where what are the things that are going to make me happy, and maybe even the degrees and all of these things that are more from the outside and not as much the internal, deep, meaningful. And now in recent years, I think we've seen an acceleration of this trend because, again, mass media has shifted from being your traditional television to being in our pockets, with the smartphones,
Hmm.
right? And so now we see this acceleration of the trends, and with that ready access to a huge amount of data, and not only the data, but also being able to connect through social media and this sort of thing, which is really more of a pseudo connection. It's not a real healthy connection. This then has accelerated. I think there's a big piece. I'm not saying it's the only, right? It's not the only piece, but it's a big part of what's accelerated our mental health crisis. And we see it very clearly in the data. For example, back in 2011 to 2012 is when over 50% of Americans started owning a smartphone. And this was precisely the same time where there was a huge spike in adolescent depression, especially in girls. And so, again, we see a lot of this correlate. That's just one example, a lot of this correlative data that helps us understand some of the reasons behind this.
Yeah, I'm also a father. I have two children, 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I'm always talking about this with my wife, and asking other parents, because sometimes we would go to a restaurant or on vacation, we're out and, we're going out to dinner, we're sitting at a table, we're looking, there's a family next to us, three kids, father, mother. All the kids are looking down at one of their electronic gadgets. They're
Yeah.
not communicating, they're not talking, they're just into their electronics. And it's really, really sad. What would you recommend, like the age for? I don't know if you get asked this question. What is the appropriate age for a child to even have a smartphone?
I frankly believe that it's best for children not to have a smartphone at all. Um, the data actually shows under age 5, kids shouldn't have screen time because the brain, and part of the issue is, the brain is so much developing in childhood. And so when you introduce screens to children at an early age, the emotional part of the brain is developing at that point. The logical part of the brain develops later on. And so, what the entertainment screens do, whether it's movies, video games, television, social media, is that they stimulate dopamine, which is this feel good neurochemical and makes you feel motivated. It's actually what's released even when people do drugs or, do some kind of addictive behavior. You get that high, that euphoria. And so, when you do that, and you introduce the screens to kids, and they have, again, very little frontal lobe, very little logical part of their brain, and the emotional part of their brain is developing, it's this huge dopamine hit, and they become addicted very easy, and they don't have the self-control to know how to say no and what and when to regulate, right? And so what it's doing is it's actually it causes not only the addiction but an overdevelopment of that emotional part of the brain. And then it also causes an underdevelopment of the frontal lobe, which is very important for reasoning, for self-control, for decision making, and even being aware of themselves and motivation and all of these factors. And so typically I recommend trying to avoid screens before age 5. And then between 5 and adulthood, no more than 1 hour a day. And then even then, it needs to be very closely monitored because there's so much junk out there, and the parents really have to state those strict controls. And then, above into adulthood, no more than an hour and a half. That this is what the research shows are kind of basically the cutoff times if you want to try to reduce your likelihood of developing mental illness. So, a lot of parents are like, "Well, but my kids, they need a phone because what if they need to call?" There are dumb phones, and so there's old school like flip phones and stuff, and they can text, and they even have some of these phones where all you can put on there is like a map app, so they can still have directions and call and text, and that's it. And that's fine. I have no issue with that, but it's the entertainment, the internet stuff that we gotta be
I
careful.
I just got this business idea. Actually, I'm thinking about maybe selling dumb phones to families. All I gotta do is take a snippet of what you just said about what the screens do and go and say, hey, check this out.
Sounds great. Let's start the business. I'm ready. I'm ready.
Oh, no, but yeah, we can laugh about this, but it's a very, very serious issue that I'm observing because I have a big family. I got sisters, brothers, they got kids, and I'm always observing and looking at, and then looking at my own family, and sometimes it's tough, but I think that it's so important to have that discipline and to start at that early time when the kids are not yet so addicted to the screen. I think that's so important. Speaking about mental health, um, how how does someone determine whether they have some kind of an ongoing issue, something that's like they're pretty close to something that can be diagnosed? How does it start, and how can one detect that?
hmm Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the early warning signs are just feeling for a lot of people either, I mean, if it's more on the anxiety spectrum, which is the most common mental illness, then it's going to often be just feeling stressed like almost all the time, feeling more easily overwhelmed, feeling worried, anxious, having insomnia, that sort of thing. If it's more trending towards more of the depressive side, a mood disorder, then it's generally going to be often you'll even start with feeling like really just burned out, just feeling like, oh man, it's so hard to get out of bed in the morning. My motivation is low, my energy is low. Oftentimes sleep starts to become an issue, and just feeling down, not losing that joy, that zest for life, and having a sense of kind of darkness, like the future just looks kind of bleak. And so those are warning signs that say, you know what, maybe it's time to really take a look at taking a break and really reassessing, where I'm going, how I'm doing in life, and maybe even getting a professional to take a look, because it is much better to figure out that we're doing some things that are causing problems earlier on rather than waiting until it gets into that really severe
Yeah,
place. Because a lot
yeah.
of us are like, oh, I can be strong and power through this. But it's better to recognize those earlier warning signs.
Is it usually typical for someone to develop, let's say, some of the depression symptoms if they're just I mean, I'm sure that when we're talking about younger generation, getting right away, getting into debt, like student debt, credit card debt, and especially right now, we're in the real estate business, so the dilemma right now that we are facing is, even millennials, Gen Z, like generation that is already looking back, let's say 20, 30 years ago, people at that age could already, purchase a home. Buying a home right now is is a problem because the prices is just so unaffordable. Take into consideration all the debt, cost of living, right? Everything. It's like, so a lot of people feel like, man, like when am I gonna get out of this hole? And every
Mhm.
time they try to do something, they kind of the hole just deepens and deepens. Um, so I can kind of understand the people get these kind of thoughts where like, okay, when will something happen in order for me to have to see at least some light at the end of the tunnel? Um, how can people, if someone is feeling really, down, depressed because of their situation, they don't see any brightness in the future, what is the way for them, like, to like, are there should they seek connection, should they seek professional help right away, what is the proper way?
Mhm. That's a great question, and it's not an easy answer, and I don't think there's just a cookie cutter answer for everybody, but I will say, first of all, I think this is why a lot of, people, on top of the media and all of this, but this is another reason why the younger generations are struggling more with their mental health because they especially, when you look at what happened in COVID, they were and even now, but they're looking toward the future and they're saying everything going on in the world, everything going on in our country, the future looks kind of bleak. And so then that's where they start losing hope. And again, that can be a big aspect of struggling with depression. So how do you deal with that? It's not easy, but we have to focus. And there's many beautiful stories about people that have come out of very difficult situations, suffering. Being prisoners of war. I think about Viktor Frankl. I think about Corey Ten Boom. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's amazing. She was also in a concentration camp in World War II. I think about Helen Keller, who said, one of the most beautiful quotes. She said, "The world is full of suffering, but is also full of those who overcome it." And
Mm,
so, again, sometimes we shift on saying like, "Oh, well, if I was able to buy a house or if I was able to like, have X amount of money in the bank, then I would be happy and satisfied." But I think we need to go back to those core values of things that really do bring true satisfaction and happiness, which again has to do everything with relationship, with connection. And so we need to get out of this individualistic type of mentality. Our society has always been, I shouldn't say always, but it tends to be very individualistic and, I have to make it on my own. But I think we need to actually start supporting one another more and looking at how we can collaborate together, reconnect as families, as communities to help build each other up. And so again, this isn't just like this is maybe a bigger picture solution. But as an individual, we can look at and say, well, how can I, just start in maybe a little choice ways of improving my overall mental, physical health, and with some of those choose life um, things,
mhm,
and then how can I look for those opportunities to take the next steps to make my life better? Just every
mhm,
day. And again, sometimes we get overwhelmed by that bigger picture, but I think if we do try to do the right next thing, and try to get into a good routine in our lives, try to implement those healthy habits, then things will start improving in our lives. And we don't always know, exactly how things are going to work out or what the plan is. And we like to plan, we like to control. But, sometimes we just have to do the best we can. And when we do that and we truly work hard, good things happen.
mm,
And I believe God blesses that when we do our part, that God has a plan for each person. And as we follow one step at a time, there's beautiful things will happen. And it's not always that we're going to end up rich, but we will have enough and we will be rich in a different way. Maybe not financially all the time, but if we keep those priorities with our relationships and the most important things in life, that will bring a meaning that nothing else could.
amen to that. Every guest that comes on the podcast, I ask them to tell a story that had an impact, a big impact in your life. Is there a story that you can share that had a profound impact in the positive?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, that we all go through those stories and those experiences, those memories. One of the ones that has impacted me the most is thinking about my grandpa, because my grandpa was he was my biggest spiritual mentor, and a lot of just life mentors that I've had. And he had many struggles. He grew up in Germany during World War II, and he's told me a lot of those stories. So he didn't have an easy life. In fact, in his teens, he became terribly depressed. He ended up having to go through shock therapy, and even at that time, they were experimenting by injecting gold into people. So he got gold injected into him. So he was a very valuable person,
Mm.
but anyway, he got better, and he really grew and found a great love for nature and for people, and very wonderful, positive man. And one thing that you know about Grandpa is that he was always incredibly grateful. Well, when I got married, this was back in 2009. Grandpa and Grandma came to our wedding, and we got married in Maui, Hawaii. We got Maui'd, as they say. And Grandma and Grandpa came to the wedding, and they loved Hawaii, and they loved it so much they decided, you know what, we're going to stay here on the island for several more weeks. So they stayed, and he was driving one day, and he got in this terrible accident where somebody T-boned him, and he fractured his hip and several ribs, and he was in a great deal of pain. They rushed him to the hospital, and he was very naturally minded, so he didn't want any pain medication, even though he was screaming out in pain. And so then people would come to the hospital, and they would hear this man screaming out in pain, and they would go to the medical staff like, I think that guy might need some help. And the staff would say, that's Bernard. He refuses pain medication. We can't do much to help him. So anyways, as soon as I found out that he was in this accident, I called up Grandpa and I said, Grandpa, I heard that you were in this accident. How are you doing? And on the other end of the line, I heard his voice was weak, and he said, Daniel, I'm so grateful. Grateful, Grandpa. How are you grateful? And he said, I don't understand exactly why this happened, but I know good will come out of it. And I know that God works all things together for good. And it was an amazing process to see him going through that experience, because even though it was hard, it was very painful. The rehabilitation took months. He had such a positive attitude that many good things actually really did come out of that. And one of the things he mentioned to me later is he said, at the scene of an accident, even though there was no stop sign, I saw a stop sign flash before my eyes. And he thought about that later, and he said, I think this was one of the things that was important, was reevaluating my life. Where am I going from here? And so, and there were many other good things that came out too. But that experience, watching him and being impacted by that, helped me to see the power of gratitude, the power of perspective, even in the midst of difficulty and suffering. When we maintain that positive attitude and trust that good can really come out of it, good does come out of it.
That's such an amazing story. As you were telling me the story, I was remembering my grandpa, my father's father, and he always was just grateful for like just minor things. He would come out, look at the trees, take his hat off, and he would always like just thanking God, and just he would notice like these just minor things. Like we were driving one time up to Washington together in a van, and he was sitting by the window, and just his comments on different mountains, different valleys, everything that he was observing, like for him, that was just like he was just so joyful. And no, he never made it really big, he never became very wealthy financially, but remembering him, he had so much wealth of
Yes.
of real wealth, that wealth that you can look at his face and this guy is happy,
Right.
and I mean, just the way he passed away also didn't suffer. It was just
Mm.
really quick. So yeah, that's great. Um, Dr. Binus, what else do you want to accomplish? I mean, you got a great. How many people you have in on your team?
Around 25.
25.
I'd
I
have
mean,
to go
you
back.
guys are doing
Yeah.
great work. Is there something like, is there like a big goal, something else that you are going after right now?
There's always a vision, right? My wife always says, I have to pull your feet down back to the ground. But yeah, our goal is to expand what we're doing. Not just to have more services here in Auburn, which we want to do some of that, but we want to train more people, and which we are doing some training already of other holistic minded counselors and psychiatrists and nurse practitioners and physician assistants and coaches, because we believe that this holistic approach is so needed, not just here in the Auburn area, but we want to start, other clinics in other areas. We also want to expand what we're doing online to help people remotely, which we're doing some of that, but we want to continue to grow that. We want to build a larger center on our property where we're at now to accomplish some of this. And so the direction, we continue to just think and pray and strategize, and so we don't know exactly where it's all going to go, but we want to multiply the efforts of what
Hmm.
we're doing. And who knows, maybe someday we'll even, I mean, we have our podcast. If you don't mind, I'll mention the name. It's the Brain
Of course.
People podcast, and I'm interested even in expanding a little more in what we're doing with media, and maybe even doing some things with radio and that sort of thing. Because again, we want to get the word out that this
Hmm.
sort of approach is not just some strange weird. It's evidence based. It works, and it really is a lot of fun. When people put these things into practice.
Yeah, after moving here to Auburn, I've also started noticing a few things, getting connected with people. And part of my vision for Auburn is to kind of create a community of like entrepreneurs
Mm,
and people who are business owners, people who are doing something in the community, and bring up the younger generation, the maybe the high school graduates, the one who are the people that are in college, and provide opportunities for them, because a lot of local businesses here are, they're kind of like running like, as a, like, it's called a business, but it's, there's all the components of everything. It isn't really run like a business, because you know how most businesses are, they're pretty much ran like a self-employed job,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
the business owner still has to always be there, and they're always running around stressed. Because I see them, I meet some of them, right? They've been running the business like that for the last 20, 25 years, and they're just getting burned out.
Hmm.
But only the main reason why is because they never really implemented certain systems and got certain systems and people in place to really have it function like a real business, like a machine, right? But that requires talent, and that requires, you know, getting kind of getting rid of that old mindset where
Yeah.
I have to control everything. If I don't, everything's gonna fall apart, you know.
Yes.
And I really see a need here to create that community. So I mean, what you guys are doing, awesome, amazing. I really look forward to seeing what you guys do next. If you can tell people how they can follow you, how can they find you?
Yeah. So our parent website is a great way to look us up, beautifulmindshealth.com, beautifulmindshealth.com. And then you can find the podcast, the Brain People podcast, on all the main podcast platforms. And so those are probably the best ways to find us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Of course.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
If you like this video, here's another one for you to watch. If you don't want to miss the next video, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button.